Today, we're digging into the incredible story of a woman who was almost completely lost to history for nearly a century. She was a princess, a highly decorated soldier, and, as you'll see, a profound paradox. Meet Kati Dadeshkeliani. She was a Georgian royal who spent 3 years on the brutal front lines of World War I. To do it, she had to disguise herself as a man. But that uniform wasn't just hiding her gender, it was hiding a deeply complicated history that seemed to contradict everything she was fighting for. So who exactly was this princess in uniform? Let's break it down. Now, her story was almost forgotten, but thanks to some recent, really important academic research in her home country of Georgia, it's finally being brought back to light. And that's what we're drawing from for this explainer. Okay, so here are the highlights. Kati was a princess from a ruling family in the stunningly beautiful, mountainous region of Svaneti in Georgia. She disguised herself as a man, took on the name Jamal, and joined one of the Russian Empire's most elite cavalry units, the so-called Wild Division. And get this, she wasn't just there. She became a decorated war hero. But what on earth would drive a princess to trade a life of privilege in Svaneti for the mud and blood of the trenches in World War I? That's a huge leap, right? You'd think her life as a princess would have been pretty idyllic. And, in many ways it was. Her memoirs talk about this childhood that was just steeped in her homeland's culture and traditions. But that world was shattered by a deep personal tragedy, the death of her sister. She later wrote that she didn't even go to war for patriotism. She went to escape her overwhelming grief, hoping to find some kind of release in the pure chaos of the front lines. And about that disguise, well, it wasn't really a choice. It was a necessity. There was an official decree from Tsar Nicholas II himself that flat-out banned women from serving in any combat roles. So, if Princess Katia wanted to enlist, she had to become Jamal. And on those front lines, wow, her courage was just undeniable. She absolutely did not shy away from the sheer brutality of it all. In her memoir, she describes watching a local woman bringing supplies get hit by a bomb and just disappearing like a cloth bundle. That moment, she wrote, shook my whole being and could never be completely erased from her mind. But here's the thing, she wasn't fearless. She felt the terror just like anyone else would. During one heavy bombardment, she wrote, a cold sweat broke out on me, and to stop my chattering, I clenched my teeth hard. And yet, she refused to get off her horse, feeling like she had to set an example, even while she was absolutely terrified. And despite that very real fear, her incredible bravery was officially recognized. Not just once, but twice. She was awarded the prestigious Order of St. George for bravery. And believe me, she earned it. She was delivering critical messages through enemy fire, pulling her wounded comrades off the battlefield. At one point, she got worried her identity would be discovered, so she transferred to a field hospital, but even there, she kept serving. She was wounded in action, suffering 2 leg fractures, and after she recovered, she went right back to duty. Just incredible. But this is where her story takes a really fascinating and, frankly, a very difficult turn. Who exactly was this incredible war hero fighting for? This is the crucial question, the central paradox of her life. Here you have a Svanetian princess fighting for the Russian Empire, the very same empire that had conquered Georgia and violently put down her own people. How do we even begin to make sense of that? To really get it, you have to rewind a few decades. There was this huge uprising in her homeland against Russian rule. And get this, her own grandfather, Tengiz, betrayed the rebels and sided with the Russian Empire. And then, just one generation later, in 1914, his granddaughter volunteers to fight for that same empire. And the consequences of that betrayal, they were absolutely devastating. We're talking about the entire village of Kaldai being razed to the ground. Entire families were massacred, exiled, or thrown in prison. This wasn't some abstract political thing. This was a brutal, fresh wound in her own homeland, and her own family was right in the middle of it. But, and this is some really important context, she wasn't entirely an outlier here. Many of Georgia's most famous noble families also served the Russian Empire. For the aristocracy at that time, loyalties were often a really complicated mix of survival, ambition, and status. So, after the war, after the revolution, after the complete collapse of the empire she fought for, what happened to Kati? And what happened to her story? Her life was just marked by unending tragedy. She had to flee Georgia when the Soviets took over, and then she had to watch from a distance as she lost her parents and all 5 of her siblings. She ended up settling in France and died there in 1977 at 87 years old, never once getting to set foot in her beloved homeland again. And her story? Well, it took its own long, painful journey into exile. She wrote her memoir back in 1934, and it was published in English, so she actually found an audience in the West. But back home in Soviet Georgia, her strong anti-communist views meant that her name and her book were completely banned. It wasn't until 2021, can you believe that her story was finally translated into Georgian and rediscovered by her own people. Which really leaves us with this final question. How should we remember Kati Dadeshkeliani? Was she a hero, defined by her incredible courage on the battlefield? Was she a victim of personal tragedy and these huge historical forces beyond her control? Or is she something far more complex, a living, breathing paradox, whose life is a mirror to the turbulent, contradictory history of her time?